Om. Om. Om.
Om Shri Sai Ram, offering our most humble and reverential pranams at the divine lotus feet of our most beloved Bhagwan. Today, in another session of Parayanam, we are blessed to have amongst us Brother Shashank Shah. Dr. Shashank Shah is blessed to be from a family of Sai devotees from the year 1965, when his great grandmother first visited Prashanti Nilayam. In January 1975, Swami physically visited his family residence in Mumbai. He completed his post graduation and doctoral studies in business management from the Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning. He received from the divine hands the governor's gold medal for standing first at the Master of Philosophy program in business management in the year 2006. And he also received the President of India gold medal for standing first in the MBA program. Between 2011 and 2014, he was doctoral, he was postdoctoral fellow and teaching faculty at the Faculty of Management and Commerce, Sri Satyasai Institute of Higher Learning. He has taught graduate courses in marketing, total quality management, and Indian ethos and values, and graduate and doctoral courses in research methods in social sciences. Dr. Shashank Shah has been visiting scholar at the Harvard Business School, USA, and held joint appointment as project director and fellow at Harvard University, South Asian University Institute, USA. For a brief period, he was visiting scholar at the Center of CSR, Copenhagen Business School, Denmark. He also served as the editor-in-chief, Postdoctoral Editors Association at Harvard University. Dr. Shashank Shah has published n number of research papers, articles, case studies, and technical notes in peer-reviewed national and international journals. He has also authored several books, the most prominent among them being Soulful Corporations, a value-based perspective on corporate responsibility, Win-Win Corporations, the Indian way of shaping successful strategies, and the most recent one, the Tata Group, from torchbearers to trailblazers, which was selected for an exclusive cover launch at the Tata Literature Festival 2018. As the chief editor and coordinator of the Sri Satyasai University's publication division for more than 6 years, he has compiled and edited over 30 books on the message of our most revered founder chancellor Bhagwan Sri Satyasai Baba. Between 2002 and 2010, Dr. Shashank Shah was blessed by Bhagwan himself to address large gatherings of students, youth, and Sai devotees on over 25 occasions at Prashanti Nilayam, Vrindavan, Chennai, and Kodaikanal in the direct divine presence. Over the last 15 years, on over 100 occasions, he had addressed large gatherings of devotees on themes relating to value based education, management, leadership, social responsibility, service, youth empowerment, Indian culture, and spirituality and unity of religions. From 1999 to 2002, Dr. Shashank Shah was a member of the youth wing Sri Sathya Sai Seva Organizations Mumbai and actively involved with the Education in Human Values program of the Institute of Sai Education Mumbai. Since 2015, he has been working closely with the All India President on projects connected with the Youth Wing, project evaluations and publications. This list goes on. So I would now request Brother Shiv Kumar to take over and
Thank you, Abhinav, and Sairam to one and all. It is indeed my honor and my privilege to have this special conversation with Dr. Shashank Shah, lovingly whom we call Brother Shashank. So, Brother Shashank, welcome to this online Parayanam, and a very warm welcome to all the devotees who have also joined us to listen to this wonderful conversation with Brother Shashank over here.
Thank
So,
you,
Brother,
Kumar. Thank you, Abhinav. It's great to connect again. We've all worked and stayed together in the hostel, so fond memories back. Thanks.
yes. And Brother Shashank, it's so nice to have you, and knowing you personally, even during my days in the hostel, I know that you are someone who is very fondly followed Bhagwan and his life, his teachings. And, in the deepest memory that I have of you is that you're very thorough about the research that you have done about Swami's life, his messages, his teachings, and the various events that have unfolded over his 85 years of avatarhood and thereafter also. So I'm sure that all of us are going to be greatly enriched by all that you have to share with us today. So let's begin right at the beginning. How did you happen to come to Bhagwan, and what were your first few interactions with him?
Yeah, so that's usually how every devotee's journey begins. I think in my case, I was blessed to be and there wasn't any South Indian canteen. And as I have been told, in those years, Swami used to be going from tree to tree on occasions, post darshan timings, to interact with the devotees. So they would cook some special food, and with the anticipation that Swami will come to them. And invariably, Swami would come and ask, "What have you cooked for me?" And maybe take a bite or two, and then tell them to take Pad Namaskar, and would warn them that make the most of this opportunity because these days will never come back. So these are the kinds of stories that I've heard from my grandparents. I did not live to see my grandmother did not survive by the time I was born, a great grandmother. But yeah, my first physical darshan of Swami was at the age of 2. I went to Swami, or rather my grandparents took me to Swami when I was just 2 years old. It was 1983. There's a very nice picture where my grandparents are holding me, and in the backdrop of the university administrative building right on top, just in front of that elephant gate. So that was my first visit. And I just try to recollect a particular experience which I am told I had. I don't have any physical memory of that, but because the question is about the first interactions or the first experience with Swami, I believe in that particular trip during the darshan time, I was sitting in my grandfather's lap. My late grandfather, Professor Chandrahas Shah, who is a professor of economics in Bombay University. I was sitting in his lap, and from the time Swami came out of the mandir, I kept on pointing in Swami's direction and saying, in Gujarati, of course, but which meant grandfather, see light, see light. So in whichever direction Swami went, I used to keep pointing at Swami and say, Dadaji, see light, light. So Professor Nanjundaya was sitting next to my grandfather, and they were colleagues because my grandfather was a visiting faculty in the Vrindavan College in the 70s. So Professor Nanjundaya asked my grandfather, what is he saying again and again, pointing at Swami? So he said that he's saying that there is light there, which means, so Professor Nanjundaya said, oh, so Swami is blessing him with a vision that he's able to see light in Swami and not Swami's physical form. But I confess I have no physical memory of this experience at all. I think this is the first time I'm sharing it on a public platform. And this is what my grandfather, even my mother, had told me as my very first experience with Swami as a 2-year-old kid. But subsequently, my physical, of course, we used to come to for darshan to Prashantanilayam every year or twice a year, especially during Diwali and Gujarati New Year. But my first set of experiences with Swami started just when I was physical experiences, when I was about to apply for the MBA entrance exam. So there are 2 or 3 small experiences I'll share, and then we'll proceed. One was, of course, the MBA entrance exam itself. Now, in those years, the MBA entrance exam used to be in the month of May. The Mumbai University final year exams also used to be in the month of May. Now, that means I would not be able to write the entrance exam because the Mumbai University final exams would be overlapping with that. So, which means I would have had to wait 1 whole year. And it wasn't possible to wait for a whole year to apply for the entrance exam, for the MBA program in Swami University. So I had written a letter to Swami in September of the previous year, explaining this whole situation. I'm telling Swami about the problems with the exam in that letter. And I sent it to one of the Bal Vikas gurus from Mumbai, and she had given it to her husband. And Swami very promptly took that letter. This was September in 2001. And in November 2001, for the very first time in the history of Mumbai University, the exams of all the courses of Mumbai University final year were advanced by 2 months. So instead of the exams being conducted in May, they were going to be conducted in March. So that was quite an unprecedented occasion where exams are advanced, because usually in Mumbai University exams always get postponed. Advancement of exams is an unheard of phenomenon. But that's where when Swami wants to pull you to him, he will create situations. And looking back, that first year was very eventful and very memorable. That was also among the last years when Swami was very active physically, because he was walking around and giving darshan. And I practically had all opportunities in that year. So that was a very memorable year. Another interesting thing happened on the very first day when we joined in Vrindavan for the summer course in 2002, which was incidentally the last summer course. So if I would not have joined that year, I would not have had the experience of a summer course also. So that first day, all the new students were given opportunity to sit in the first block. And Swami came for darshan, and the expression on his face was as if, oh, so you all have come finally, as if he is waiting and looking forward to seeing us, meeting us. That expression that of his eyes, of his face was very, very communicative of that particular feeling. And then 2 or 3 of my classmates, they got up on their knees and they wanted to, the moment you become a student, because for the previous 2 decades, I've always sat in all possible lines from the first row, if I would have got the first token, all the way to the last row of Kulwant Hall. So I very well, and that also after waiting in line for 4 hours, 5 hours. So I knew very well what it meant to walk royally from the students' entrance and then go and sit in the first block. I mean, I have never missed a single opportunity to do that in all the years when I have been there, because I knew what it was otherwise. So they got up and they wanted to tell Swami, or rather they told Swami, Swami, we are all your new students, they said with a lot of joy, saying that Swami will say, oh, new students, very good, and there'll be some opportunity of conversation. Swami looked at them and he said, Kadu, no, old, all are old, he said. On the face of it, a little contradictory, but deep insight that we are not new to Swami. We have been with Swami over several lifetimes. In fact, those who choose God are actually the ones who are chosen by God. So we have not landed up there, or we have not landed up in Swami's fold, or we have not landed up in a spiritual life by a coincidence. This is all the endeavors that we've been making over several lifetimes, and Swami has been a constant companion in this journey. So in one particular lifetime, if we say, Swami, we are new, he's not going to accept that. That's the same thing which Krishna had told to Arjuna, where he told to him about their relationship over several lifetimes. Then Arjuna says, but Krishna, I know you only in this life. Then Krishna tells him that, no, you and I have come together over several lifetimes. You are not aware of them, but I remember all of them. So I think the relationship between devotees and students and Swami is of that kind, that we are not new to him, we are old. And there are several other occasions, maybe in the conversation I'll mention about them, where Swami indicated that he had seen me earlier. For example, I'll just share one off the cuff. During the interview, when Swami blessed us to accompany him to the Atirudra Mahayajnam in Chennai, in the interview, Mr. S.V. Giri was talking about us and our public speaking skills, etc., and how we could be of great use during the visit to Chennai, because there were several programs, public programs lined up. So Swami said, yes, yes, I know this boy speaks very well. He pointed at me. He also spoke during the First World Conference in Mumbai. You know, the First World Conference was almost 2 decades before I was born. So that's the kind of thing. We really don't know what has been the kind of association we've had with Swami and what our past has been. But when he says all are old, we are all old in our association with Swami, and it is good that way, because the older the association, the deeper it is and the more solid and strong it is and will last for the future. Another small example, and then we'll move on. This is regarding a particular dream I got. So I, being from Mumbai, always liked half sleeve shirts. Now this may sound a little trivial, but I thought I'll definitely share. I was always fond of half sleeve shirts. I never used to wear full sleeve shirts. In fact, there were so many of them which my mother had got with great taste as a kid, but I never wore them. So the same continued in Prashant Nilayam. So I had taken 3 or 4 pairs of white shirt and pant and half shirts. So sometime in August, I get a dream, and then in that dream, Swami is telling me, why are you wearing half sleeve shirt? You must wear full sleeve shirt. I woke up the next day and I thought maybe this is one of the dreams. Sometimes we get dreams which don't mean anything. Maybe just Swami wanted to give me darshan. So and given my own discomfort with a full sleeve shirt, I said maybe Swami is just giving me darshan. A fortnight later, again I got the same dream. This was a little of a reprimand. A little bit of a reprimand. He said, I told you to wear full sleeve shirt. Why are you still wearing half sleeve shirts? Now, same dream 2 times with a gap of a fortnight, giving me time to at least implement his thing. I said, no, there must be something. So I really followed that with going to the tailor and getting 2 pairs of full sleeve shirts stitched. And in September, when the vacations began, on the very first day, Swami asked the registrar in the morning, who will speak today? So the registrar said, Swami, boys are not ready. If you give them 2 days time, the boys will be ready. Swami said, no, no, that boy from Bombay is there. By then I had already spoken 2-3 times. And Swami on his own, he said, no, no, that fair boy from Bombay is there. That's another story. I'll come to that. But Swami used to keep giving me these synonymous names, that fair boy, that Bombay boy, and then later on, whatever other affiliations, he will say that, but he won't mention my name. So that fair Bombay boy is there, he will speak. So that day afternoon, I come to Mandir, and then registrar calls me near the Krishna statue and says, Swami wants you to speak. I said, sir, why did you give my name on the first day? You would have, I'm a new student, you should have given me 2 days time. This was Professor Lakshmi Narasimham. A very nice and warm individual, very, very empathetic, supportive, encouraging, and very inspiring also, his life as a devotee, as an administrator, as a teacher, researcher. So he said, Babu, that's how he used to lovingly call the student, Babu, I did not suggest your name to Swami. Swami himself said that that boy, fair boy from Bombay will speak today. So that was like the first revelation that yes, physically Swami has started recognizing you, he remembers you. But then what was the problem? I had come to Mandir with a half sleeve shirt. And that's when my mind went back a fortnight earlier, and Swami had already kind of given me time to prepare or rather get full sleeve shirt stitched. So I rushed one of my roommates to the hostel, gave him my cupboard keys. He got a full sleeve shirt. I went to the Brindavan hostel. I changed into the full sleeve shirt, and some of the teachers said, no, it's okay. This is not a festival program. Even if you have worn half sleeve shirt, it's okay. They did not know the background to it, that I've got 2 warnings already in the previous month, that I should live up to that, because this is the test time. So you don't get time to prepare for the test, but you may get some advance warnings if you are attentive enough. So I did get them. And then I wore the full sleeve shirt, and I was sitting in the first row. Swami came and he stood right in front of me, and then he inspected me from top to bottom, saw me with the full sleeve shirt and all of that. And then he smiled and gave an acknowledging look. And then he again said the same words, Bombay boy? I said, yes, Swami. So these are the kinds of interactions we are Swamis, and which communicate. Swami is so particular about external appearances. We today are very casual, we shave, we don't shave, we have a long hair. Of course, nowadays, because of the lockdown, the saloons themselves are closed. But otherwise, our haircut is not as per Swami's expectations. Our grooming is not as per Swami's expectations, our dressing is not as per Swami's expectations. And for the benefit of the listeners, there are dozens of discourses where Swami is very specifically mentioned about fashion, style, and discipline. Why? Because there is a brand that Swami also wishes to communicate. This is how Sai devotees are dressed. This is how Sai students are dressed. This is how he expects us to be, because if we are not physically and externally disciplined, spiritual discipline is going to be even more difficult. So these are the baby steps. And I think when we are able to take these baby steps, then he prepares us for giant steps. So these are the first few examples that I remember.
Very nice, very nice. I mean, I'm sure, if this was just the beginning and then the first few interactions, there may be so many more that, we can look forward to. Among all the, interactions that you've had or the experiences that you've had with Swami, there must have been something that must have been most important and would have, etched a very deep impression in your mind. Is there something that you can share which even we all can learn from?
Yeah, I think there's one experience which I did not realize while it was unfolding, but over the years I have come to acknowledge it very often. I've shared this earlier also, but it's very topical. It's very relevant for all of us. And I think it took me 2 years to realize what Swami was trying to teach me. So this goes back to what I said. Swami always used to call me with the name Bombay Boy. And that started right from my very first interaction in June 2002 when Swami spoke to me in Prasanthi Nilayam, very first time. And his typical first question was, where do you come from? So, where do you come from? Bombay, Swami. Okay. Every possible interaction thereafter, this used to be the first question. Where do you come from? Bombay, Swami. Whether it is in the Prasanthi Nilayam Mandir, whether it is in the interview room, whether it is in Vrindavan, whether it is in Kodaikanal. I remember we were all with Swami upstairs in Sai Shruti, just outside his room. I still remember that visual is very clear in my mind. First day of the Kodai trip, 12th of May 2003, and right from outside Swami's room, including his room, you can see the beautiful Kodai lake. And as in the early morning, the first rays of the sun are just getting visible, the mist is rising from the Kodai lake. So it gives you a heavenly experience. It gives you a feeling of the of the Vaikuntham, as we've read in the scriptures. And then you can imagine Swami is right there standing next to you. So what he used to do is the curtains used to be drawn because all the devotees would be standing on the road. So he used to quickly pull the curtain a little bit from aside and look outside. And still there would be a lot of people who would immediately get alert because they see the curtain is moving slightly, and from there a little bit of Swami's hair was visible, which was his most identifiable insignia of his appearance. So even there, after that conversation, after that lake, Swami asked me, where do you come from? I said, Bombay, Swami. So he said, Kadu, Ipudu Bombay Kadu, Ipudu Mumbai. It means it's no longer Bombay, it is Mumbai, isn't it? I said, yes, Swami, Mumbai. So this continued all the way. So the first day, Kodaikanal, same question. Last day of the Kodaikanal stay, we were about to leave. Same question. Where do you come from? Bombay, Swami. It continued till the time I finished my MBA, and I was, Swami blessed me to do my PhD, and for that I had to register for my MPhil and all of that. On the day I was going to, I went to Swami for blessings in the Bhajan Hall for commencing the MPhil program. Same question, where do you come from? So by the time I had finished my MPhil, I started reflecting on why is it that the conversation is not moving beyond this? Where do you come from? Where do you come from? There must be something to it. So I did some research, and since since the introduction has talked a lot about my research, I started doing research on this as well. And then I realized that whenever Swami asked that question to the primary school children, where do you come from? They would say, from you, Swami. So Swami used to be very happy. He said, see, these boys, they know of their divine origin. So they are saying that they have come from Swami. And when he would ask that question to institute boys, and if they say, where do you come from? From you, Swami. Swami will say, bad boy, bad answer. How can you come from me? You're so tall and hefty. I'm so slim and short. How can you come from me? All, what word Swami used to use? He used to say, all artificial Vedanta you're talking. So, Donga Vedanta means all incorrect Vedanta you're talking. So I said, if my answer of Bombay is not working, maybe Swami wants me to give an answer which the primary school kids are giving for some reason. So that particular day when I was about to, when Swami, I was requesting Swami's blessings for the commencing the MPhil program, Swami again asked me the question. Same joyful expression as if he doesn't know the answer. Where do you come from? Then I paused for a second and then I looked at him straight into the eye and said, from you, Swami. Swami smiled, and from that day, he never asked me the question till the very physical end as to where I come from. So that's a very important lesson. Where do you come from? We've all come from divinity. There's this famous thing which Swami shared, I've also mentioned, but it's very topical of this envelope, which does not have a from address and a to address. Swami said such envelopes go into the dead letter box. Because if you have either of the addresses, they will either go from or to. Ideally, you should have both. But those that don't have a from or a to address go to the dead letter box. And then in the discourse, Swami said, all of you are like the envelopes which will land up in the dead letter box. Because you do not know where you have come from. You do not know where you are going. If you know where you have come from, then you will know where you have to go back. Because anybody who has come here will go back where he has come from, isn't it? Similarly, when you know that all of you have come from divinity, you will ultimately be working towards going back to divinity. This world is only a temporary playground to learn selflessness and service. This world is a laboratory where you can experiment with the practice of human values. This world is like a university where you can gain higher education. But that's all the role this world has to play. You have to go back from where you have come from, and that is to divinity itself. So I think this particular series of where do you come from questions were actually an initiation into the spiritual journey back to the source. So that is increasingly prodding me to consistently remind myself and share this again and again, that if we are not aware, Swami always used to say, don't develop too much of love and fascination for this world, because if you do, you'll keep coming back again and again. Look at it as a playground, as a laboratory, as a university. And just as you benefit in a playground, a laboratory and university, but don't settle down there, similarly, the world has to be seen in that.
Oh, this is very insightful, and it's something that we have to keep reminding ourselves, because we tend to get associated and we tend to get attached to all the things that we own with the people that we are associated with, and to keep reminding ourselves that our source and destination both is Bhagwan is an important lesson for all of us. You kind of alluded to the Kodai trip that you had, and you know that incident with Swami. And yeah, personally, I've visited Kodai, of course, post Swami's physical sojourn, and I definitely remember that beautiful Kodai morning on that lake, very heavenly. You've been very fortunate to have more than a couple of Kodai trips, 3 if I'm not wrong.
Yes, so, yes. 2003, 5 and 7, yeah. The first one was the shortest, just 9 days, 9 nights rather. And the last one was the longest. That was like about 24 days.
Wow. So what were your most cherished moments from those trips, and any lessons again, that, see, ultimately, I'm sure Swami gives us all those beautiful experiences, but hidden in them are, gems of wisdom and learning. So anything that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, a couple of them. Mainly how we can practice some of those things. I would always look for what is in it for me. In a very selfish way in the world today, when we always say, what is in it for me? When you do a business deal, for anything, the mind first asks, what is in it for me? So the same approach towards Swami, but what is in it for my spiritual progress? What is in it for me so that I can gain from this opportunity? I still remember on the last day of the first Kodai trip, 2003, Swami said, what will you do when you go back after this trip? Because Swami used to select a few students, a couple of dozen students to come with him. So he asked, what will you do when you go back? And he himself gave the answer. He said, when you go back, you should put into practice all that you have learned here. It is only then the effort of bringing you here, the expenses involved and the rare opportunity which you have got, which others have not got, is worthwhile. If you are going to go back to your old ways and not implement or practice what you have learned here, then what is the use of coming along with Swami to Kodaikanal? So I think every opportunity, every experience, every interaction with Swami should transform us into a better person. If not, then at least the journey should begin. Otherwise, we may have a cupboard full of experiences which will keep narrating and parroting. But if that has not led into an iota of change in us, then I think the opportunity of receiving that experience also is incomplete. So I'll share a few of them. One, of course, one particular evening, Swami was not very happy with the bhajans that were sung. So he came back into the Sai Shruti Mandir, where we used to sit in the evening. Swami used to sit on his chair. We used to all sit around Swami. Very nice opportunities. I mean, they are not even imaginable now, but again, it's only Swami's grace. There is no merit or credit anybody can take for receiving anything from Swami. It's purely Swami's grace. But that day, he was not happy with the bhajans that were sung. And Swami was very particular because in Tamil Nadu, due to the expertise in Carnatic music, the devotees themselves have a lot of knowledge connected with music, dance, and the other performing arts. So he said that devotees have come from different parts of Tamil Nadu. And if you sing in a way which is not up to my standards and expectations, or their standards and expectations, then what will they say? I have got all of you from Prashanti Nilayam here, and if you don't do justice, it's not correct. You're not doing your duty. Then he asked everybody, did the boys sing well? Did the boys sing well? So each of them gave very diplomatic answers, the elders specifically, because you can't tell Swami that his boys didn't sing well. At the same time, you can't tell Swami that the boys have sung well when Swami himself is not happy. So you have to be extremely particular in the choice of words. So finally, he looked at the students and said, are you happy with what you sang today? Forget whether I am happy or not. Forget the people from Tamil Nadu. Forget everybody. Are you happy with your singing? If you are happy in the heart of hearts and are satisfied with your singing, then be rest assured that I am also happy. But if you yourself are not happy, then even if externally Swami appears to be happy, Swami is not happy with your performance. That was a very powerful lesson in what is true satisfaction for Swami, or how we can make Swami happy. Because usually we relate to or associate Swami's happiness with an external approval, a nod, a path namaskar, a smile, or whatever. But here Swami delayered all of that. He even removed himself from the picture and said, if you are happy inside, which means if your conscience is satisfied with the work that you have done or what you have offered me, then I am happy. But if your conscience is not happy, then I am not happy. Because what is the conscience? The conscience is Swami himself. It is God sitting there. That's why in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is holding the reins. In the Kathopanishad analogy, the one who is holding the reins of this chariot of life is the conscience, the Buddhi, God himself. So if the conscience is happy, then Swami is happy. I remember, I was told when my grandparents got an interview, their only one in 1980 in April, my grandfather said, Swami, today is a Thursday. Please accept me as your disciple and you become my guru. So Swami said, no, I am not your guru. And then Swami touched his heart like this and he said, your conscience is your guru. Always follow your conscience. So Swami has placed himself within us. That divinity principle within us is our guru. And we need to constantly ensure that whatever we do is as per the diktats of the conscience. Do not be worried about external appearances. And that's why Swami always used to say, I am not Bahya Priya, I am Bhava Priya. I am not going to be happy by external appearances. I am going to be happy by your intention, by your bhavam. And who better to tell you whether your intention is in the right track or not than your own conscience. That is one. Another experience I remember, Swami had sent us for boating. This was in 2005. The first one was in 2003. In 2005, Swami sent us for boating. It was a ritual. Every time you go to Kodaikanal, you go for boating. And on the Kodai Lake, there are these lotuses, purple colored lotuses that are kind of on the lake. It appears that they are floating. Actually, they are not floating. They are growing from the bed of the lake, and they're so long that they reach on the top of the lake, and with the sunlight they bloom. So while boating, some of the students pulled out a few of the lotuses. They wanted to offer it to Swami, saying that we'll get to offer lotuses at the lotus feet. That was the intention behind it. I was not a part of that group because I had guessed what the reaction would be. But what happened was a validation of my belief. So that this was in the afternoon, and that evening when Swami came, set of students who had pulled out these lotuses offered it to Swami. Swami, we've got that. We've got these lotuses from the Kodai Lake. So Swami, his expression suddenly changed. He said, "You pulled these lotuses from the lake?" They said, "Yes, Swami. We wanted to offer the lotuses at your lotus feet." Immediately, Swami's expression changed. You don't have brains. What is the beauty of the lotus if it is not on the surface of the lake where it has grown? Why should you put this? Why should you distance nature from its source of existence? The beauty of the lotus is always on the lake. Do not disrespect nature. You should always pull out things or take from nature only when it is. I think in today's times, when the importance of nature, environment, ecology has become so visible, these lessons are very important, because nature is verily the tangible manifestation of divinity. So by disrespecting nature, by disturbing the natural balance, we are actually not doing justice to the very divine principle, which is the undercurrent. There's another experience I remember about horse riding, which is all something which was a regular ritual. I used to send people for the students for horse riding. So I remember a conversation. I don't remember which of 3 trips it was, but in one of the trips, this conversation came up. I guess Swami himself raised it, because we're talking about nature and not hurting anybody. So this conversation that by horse riding, you are actually hurting the horse, because you're riding on it and you're encouraging some kind of a trouble to the animals, etc. So then Swami very beautifully explained. He said, "Bangaru, I know that in some form it's hurting the horse, but now that the horse has been domesticated and it is brought to Kodaikanal, which is not its natural habitat, and it is being used around for the sake of the tourists, if you don't ride the horse, neither the horse will get food tonight, nor will the horseman's family get food tonight. So by you spending that half an hour on the horse and participating in that tourist joy-giving activity, you are actually feeding the horse, the horseman, and his family." I mean, the sensitivity and the kind of depth of Swami's understanding. We talk about capitalism, socialism, and some of these isms. Swami was a true socialist at heart. Practical socialism is what Swami always used to encourage. Concern for the migrants is all about migrants today, everywhere. We are doing so much of seva activities to feed the migrants. Every trip, Swami used to give money to the students to go and do shopping. Swami used to always mention, go to those Tibetan shopkeepers who get the woolen clothes to Kodaikanal during the certain season, and don't bargain with them. They live a very tough life. They've come all the way from Tibet and settled down here. They have a lot of problems. So don't bargain with them. Whatever money you give, help them lead a happy life. So buy from them and give them whatever they ask for. So these small things, when we go out, these are things which are all practical and applicable in our workaday life. Whether it is respect for nature, whether it is about tourism, whether it is about shopping, the sensitivity and the empathy which Swami encouraged on such occasions is really phenomenal. Some examples from what you asked on the Kodai trips.
Beautiful, beautiful. And you know, I was reminded when Swami, you were telling about Swami, you know, how students would come and enjoy and then go back. So Swami has always spoken about this part-time devotion, full-time devotion.
Yeah.
And we in our, you know, day-to-day lives, we are bound by so many responsibilities. And a lot of, mundane way of living our lives also. Somewhere we tend to forget this. And Swami also says, we are like a rat stuck in a mridangam, going from the world to God and back and forth. So how do we really get this right? How do we move towards developing full-time devotion the way Bhagwan would like it?
Yeah, I think first we need to understand what is devotion. The basis of devotion is love. And to say that we can love somebody part-time is really a fallacy, because our mother doesn't love us part-time, right? Her love for us is a ceaseless flow. Even if she's not in our presence, whatever she does, that love for her children is going to be manifest, and vice versa. So when that love for our physical relationships, our parents, etc., is very continuous, then how can our love for God be part-time? So first of all, we need to understand that true love is selfless, and part-time love is actually selfish, because you are having an expectation in return, and that's why at that particular point in time that is getting manifest. So how does our part-time devotion manifest itself? So we go to samitis or sai centers Monday, Thursdays and Sundays, whenever, twice a week, different countries at different days. Gulf countries meet during the Friday holiday, so different parts of the week. But after we do that, we go back to our workaday life. So those few hours a week is when we think, okay, this is Swami's work, I do with all attention, and then go back. And then what happens? We do these deals with Swami. We've kind of made divinity into an ATM machine. So ATM machine is, you insert a card and you get cash. Here you insert a prayer and you get a response. You insert a query, you get an answer, irrespective of our deservedness, irrespective of our willingness, irrespective of our readiness receive that kind of a guidance or grace. So that we need to understand. Swami had said in one of the discourses, people are indulging in lottery sharing agreements with the Lord Venkateshwara. They go to Tirupati and say that I have, the Swami said in the discourse, I have purchased a lottery, and if I win a prize, I will donate a part of the amount. Next week, I'll come and donate. So Swami laughed and said, do you think that Lord Venkateshwara is interested in the money? You think that he wants your money when he has created this entire universe and all of, and Lakshmi is very consort. Do you think that he is interested in any of these partnership deals? So what can we give God? I think the whole focus should be on this aspect of love. How can we have full-time devotion? How can we have full-time love? And that is when we need to realize that Swami always used to say, hands in the society, head in the forest. Earlier, devotion used to be equated with retiring to the forest. Swami has never ever encouraged anybody to give up their worldly duties. Swami, in my knowledge and reading, has never initiated anybody into sannyasa. For that matter, Rama, Krishna, none of the avatars have ever initiated anybody into sannyasa. Because the whole objective of an avatar is to make our lives spiritual in totality. And how do you do that? There's this famous example of Bhagya sir, you will be knowing, but I've also shared earlier, but the benefit of the devotees. Bhagya sir is our statistics professor at Swami's University, and he's extremely serious and focused on sadhana. When he first came to Swami, the first 2 years, he realized that the work at the university was extremely demanding in terms of time. So he didn't get any time to do his spiritual practices. So he decided to resign. He gave his resignation. This was towards the end of the summer course. And after the summer course, Swami came back to Prashantilim. He gave a faculty interview. And Professor Rao, the principal, insisted that Bhagya sir comes for the interview because his resignation has still not been accepted. And in that interview, Swami was talking about spirituality and all of that. And then Swami looked at Bhagya sir and say, Bhagya, I heard you want to resign and go. He said, yes, Swami. Why? Because I'm not getting time for spiritual practice. Swami said, what will you get what will you do when you get more time? He said, I'll do sadhana, Swami. What will you get when you do sadhana, Swami? I will attain you. Then Swami looked at him, he looked at Bhagya sir, and Bhagya sir was almost sitting at Swami's feet, and his clothes were touching Swami's robe. So Swami said, how much close can you get to me than this? Then he said something very prophetic. He said, Bhagya, if you separate worldly life or secular life and spiritual life, then I will not give you what you want even for 10,000 births. So the statistics professorship in him immediately made him calculate average human life is 70 years. 10,000 births meaning 7 lakh years. So 7 lakh years self-realization is postponed. So immediately he called hold of Swami's feet and said, Swami, please don't do that. Swami said, yes. Then you should spiritualize your daily life. Whatever you do it as Swami's work. You're teaching the students, do it as Swami's work. They are willing to receive. You want to give. Where else you will get a better opportunity? A homemaker cooking food, if she thinks it's for Swami, that becomes devotion. If a businessman deals with his customers as if he is treating Swami with all commitment and attention, of course charging for the services, but with the selfless motive of solving the customer's problem. If a lawyer helps the client as if he's helping Swami, if a teacher teaches a student as if she is helping Swami, then whatever we do in our normal lifetime becomes Swami's work. It becomes full-time devotion. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna had spoken about karma phala tyaga. You do whatever you have to and then do not expect anything in return. Swami tweaked it a little bit because it's very difficult to not have expectations. So Swami transformed karma phala tyaga into pavitra karma. What is pavitra karma? Sarva karma bhagavad prityartham. Whatever you do for making divinity happy. What will be the advantage of that? Your intentions and priorities will always be pure because you're doing it for Swami. And you will not have expectations for any tangible returns because you are dedicating it to Swami to make Swami happy or make the chosen form of divinity that you believe in happy. Once these two things happen, your life itself becomes worship. In fact, that was the agenda of Swami's life. In the interview which he gave to Mr. Karanjia in 1976, which has come out as a book, God Lives in India, Swami said that the whole objective of the triple Sai avatar is work, worship and wisdom. So the focus of the Satyasai incarnation is to transform work into worship. And this is the way to transform work into worship. When everything we do, if we do for making the divinity happy within us, that is full-time devotion.
Wow, that's beautiful. So the takeaway essentially is that irrespective of what you're doing, where you are, with whom you're dealing, treat them as Swami and offer it to Swami.
Yes.
And do it as if you're doing it for Bhagwan. Beautiful.
Yes.
Very nice. Now, all of this requires one to develop, some form of an inner connect with Bhagwan. It could be in any form of relationship, right? Mother, son, daughter, friend, grandfather, whatever. And that's the most essential part, because once you develop that connect, then you can build on it.
Correct.
How does one build this connect? Because a lot of times maybe they may not have had a physical interaction with Bhagwan ourselves, or may not have had a personal miraculous experience ourselves. Is it enough if we listen to others' experiences, and can that help us to build this connect? How do we do this?
Yeah, so there are two parts. I'll take the first part first. How can we develop inner connect with Swami? So first of all, till we understand him, how are we going to be able to develop a connect? How do I develop a connect with anybody unless I know who he is? Unless I develop a bond with him? Unless I know what his thoughts are, what his views are? So I think to develop that inner connect with Swami, we need to understand his principle. We need to understand his message. Otherwise, how do we know that that so-called inner connect is our mind which is talking to us? Or we think that the Swami inside is happy. Actually, the mind is happy by enabling us to fulfill all other things. And we think, no, Swami is happy. And we have this habit of saying, Swami within told me that this is how it should be. That's the biggest joke. Because what Swami is telling you is for you. It is not for telling the whole world. So you have to practice what the Swami within you is telling, and your actions to speak for yourself. So that is the kind of prerequisite for inner connect as I understand. And that for me began after Swami's Mahasamadhi in a very substantial measure, because I was there in Prashanti Nilayam, and all of a sudden your life is centered around your guru, your master, and then that form is not there. So you become rudderless. You have absolutely nothing to hold on to. That's when from inner motivation, I realized that I should know what Swami's message is, and maybe I'll be able to experience him, relate to him. So I started listening to Swami's discourses in a very structured way. I would go every day or at least every alternate day for a long walk from the hostel towards the airport in the evening when students used to go to the stadium for games and all. So, and what I used to do, I used to plug in. So I used to spend that entire hour walking in the midst of nature and listening to an entire discourse of Swami. And it was as if Swami was directly speaking to me through his discourse. And I didn't take up random discourses and just do it as a random exercise. I would do in a structured way. I would take 15 discourses of Samar Shah's 1990 or 15 discourses from a particular Kodai trip, and so on and so forth. So in those 15 days, Swami has covered enormous number of ideas and given you enormous number of insights which are beneficial for a particular aspect of your understanding. That enabled me to understand and appreciate Swami in very tangible ways. Because otherwise, unless you've understood, what experience you may get is only a partial aspect of Swami's identity or the identity of divinity. But when you try and start reflecting on his message in a very substantial measure, you are able to realize the very larger set of perspectives of what Swami stands for or the depth of knowledge that Swami has provided. For example, if you read the Vahinis, it's like so insightful that we wouldn't realize that most of the doubts that we have about scriptures or about our spiritual practices are all right there answered. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is mentioned, Krishna tells Arjuna, Jnatum drashtum tatvena praveshtum cha. First Jnatum, to know, then drashtum, then see or reflect on that. And then tatvena praveshtum cha. Then it will get internalized in you. It will become a part of your actions. It will become your second nature. So if we want to develop this inner connect with Swami and have him or experience him all the time, how this is the prerequisite. Otherwise, how do we know what to do in a particular situation? For example, in the Ramayana or in the Bhagavatam or Mahabharata, how do we know how to behave in a particular situation unless we know how Pandavas behaved in a particular situation of difficulty, how Rama behaved, how Prahalada behaved? Swami had said in an interaction with students in the portico on 18 September 1992, all these scriptures are Acharana Granthas. They are manuals for practice, for action. So they are not just for reading and blind rituals. You have to internalize those into your life. So we have to live those values. For that, we should know them. For that, we should be able to explore and understand more and more. Then we'll be able to live in what Swami always say, constant integrated awareness. Awareness not of the divinity, but at least of his message and how we can practice it in given situation. They will flash before us. This is what we should do in this situation. This is what that particular scriptural hero or heroine did. This is what instruction Krishna or Rama gave in this particular situation. Then that connect inside will start getting stronger because you have tied yourself to those strings of the scriptural insights and his message to him. And that will keep pulling you and you to him and him to you in all situations.
Beautiful. But, the second part where is it enough? I mean, so the first part I completely understand. It's like a new daughter-in-law coming into a family, or you getting in touch with a new friend, etc. There's a lot of effort that each of us makes to understand the other person and understand their likes, their dislikes, their preferences, and tries to make them happy in a certain way. And in the same way, as you suggested, we should read Bhagwan, we should know what he says, his inferences on various things. How do we also, learn from others' experiences?
No, I think knowing from others' experiences is important till a point where you start getting your own experiences. But that should not lead to what I often call as spiritual entertainment. Because we all would like to keep listening to the larger than life experiences of others. And then we just limit it to that and say, what did you learn from it? Nothing, but wow, what an experience she had or what an experience he had. And then sometimes leads to a hina bhavana, kind of a negative feeling within you. Oh, they had such an experience I didn't have. Probably they are more devoted than me, but no, I'm devoted. Then maybe Swami is not as divine. These are the kinds of thoughts our mind takes us to. It happens with established devotees, like Bhadrachal Ramadas' story. Swami used to narrate several times when he was put in jail in the Golconda fort by Tanisha. And there, because Rama was not responding to his prayer for several years, there are several kirtanas where Bhadrachal Ramadas tells him that I have a lot of bhakti, maybe you do not have Shakti, and that's why you are not responding to my prayers. And then finally he reflects that no, there's a very nice Telugu poem. I don't have that much command of Telugu, but in that Swami always used to say that can an ordinary monkey cross over the ocean? Can ordinary Lakshmana and Bharata behave in such extraordinary ways? If all these people are able to do all this, it's only because of your divinity, Rama. So you are definitely divine. I am a fool. My bhakti is not enough. So I need to buck up. So listening to others' experiences should definitely sow the seeds of faith in us. But to just keep waiting from one experience to the other and just retain ourselves in our old world ways is not going to help. Because then what happens? Swami is divine. We are human. He is God. We are not. We will continue to make mistakes. He will continue to forgive us. And there is no transformational opportunity that we take upon ourselves because we are extremely comfortable with life that way. So that should not happen.
Right. So, I mean, this is very insightful. A lot of us tend to get into this trap, and I think this is one way to remind ourselves to not get there. You also began with, how Swami expects us as Sai devotees, as Sai students to behave and conduct ourselves. There must also be like a role that he would like us to play in this lifetime. Any expectations that he has specifically from us, so that we stand out from the rest of the world and stand out as examples for the world outside. What do you think, what would you ascribe as our primary role?
I think I'll go back to an experience which was shared with us by one of our teachers. This goes back to the early 1990s. Swami was very upset with the students for some reason, some indiscipline, and Swami stopped talking to them. So always students used to plead with Swami, please Swami, and whatever, in terms of again winning his grace, his approbation, etc. So, but Swami was very upset that time. So the Vice Chancellor, Professor Sampath, intervened on behalf of the students. Swami, after all, they are students. This is the age in life when they tend to make mistakes. Please forgive them. Swami said something very insightful to Professor Sampath. Swami said, Sampath, do you know what I have, what expectations I have from them? Swami said, Professor Sampath said, no. Then Swami said, Sampath, I want each one of them to be like, he pointed at himself and said, I want each one of them to be like me. Being like me does not mean wearing an orange robe and having a mop of hair. Being like me means being divine from top to toe. That is the expectation I have from all my students and devotees. That is why I'm investing all this time, energy and effort through institutions and projects, through darshan, sparshan and sambhashan, so that they are able to work towards that destiny and destination. But they are not realizing this opportunity and they are whiling away their time in trivial pursuits. And that is why I'm so upset with them this time. So that's a very, very powerful reminder that Swami's expectations with us are just right there. They are not any like, okay, hoga, we will continue, we'll try. No, here and now, Swami has given the mission statement of life. The mission statement of life is we are born so as not to be born again. Clear. There is no other mission statement of life. And how do we achieve that? In 1965, on 2nd October, in a discourse, Swami gave that example of salt and dal. Very often when we cook food, of course, I don't know, Shiv Kumar, whether you cook or not, I don't cook much. But our aunties who would be listening to, sisters who would be listening to this would be definitely cooking lots of delicacies, especially in these lockdown days. And in that time, if we ask them how they make dal, do you put equal amount of dal and salt while you prepare dal or sambar for that matter? And they will all start laughing because you don't do that. You put a lot of dal and just little bit of salt to taste. That's how dal or sambar is made. Of course, the other ingredients. Now, our usual expectation is that life, if we compare it, dal is our worldly life. We have to invest time in gaining knowledge, in getting a degree, then in getting professional success, having a family, having children, progressing, promotion, designations, money, awards, etc. Right? This is the main focus of life. And spirituality is the salt which will give taste to this entire journey. That's the usual belief. And then Swami said, Kadu, wrong. That's incorrect. The dal of life is your spiritual pursuits, because you are born so as not to be born again. So all the efforts and endeavors that you make should be towards that end. The salt of life is your worldly pursuits, which should make your spiritual journey comfortable with access to resources and access to other infrastructure and ecosystem, which will help you in your spiritual journey. So that is the kind of total change of perspective. For long years, I always believed the former, not about dal, but for education and human values, I always thought that values are important along with education, because we need to be good human beings, right? But then when Swami always used to say Adhyatma Vidya Vidyanam, which means of all the education, the knowledge of Adhyatma, spirituality, is the most important. Then I realized why, because you have to cross this samsara sagara. You are born so as not to be born again. And if you want to do that, then you have to know how to do that. And hence we need to have that priority. So how should we, what should be our role? I think that is the role that we need to play. We should be different from others. How? Another example. Swami gave a discourse to students, MBA students, in December 1998 in the AB room in the college. And there Swami gave this example of this particular person, this Brahmin, who went to a hotel. And then he went there and he asked for some vegetarian dishes. So the waiter came there and he said, sir, do you have any eyesight problem? So this man said, no. He said, sir, then how come you are asking for vegetarian dishes? He said, because I'm a Brahmin, I'm a vegetarian. So he said, sir, you please come with me. He took him outside, and there outside it was written in big bold letters, military hotel, which means non-vegetarian hotel. He said, sir, this is a non-vegetarian hotel. You won't get vegetarian food here. Swami said, in the same way, this world has a big board. What is that board? It's given in the Bhagavad Gita. Anityam asukham lokam. This world is anityam. It is temporary. It is asukham. It is incapable of giving permanent joy. The whole lot of people, the entire lot of 8 billion people are consistently trying to get joy from their worldly ways. They realize that joy is not long lasting. So they immediately shift attention to gaining the next kind of joy. So this joy plus that joy plus that joy plus that joy, and thinking that some joy will remain, but it will not remain. Because the nature of the world is like the non-vegetarian hotel. You won't get vegetarian food. So what is the solution? Imam prapya bhajasvamam. Having realized this, think of me. Prioritize me and work towards that end goal. So how should we be different from others? In our priorities, in our focus, in all that we do. We should not be looking for vegetarian food in this non-veg world. It won't be available. And that should be seen in our actions. That is the way to distinguish ourselves from others, not just by a white dress or a vibhuti mark or for going for bhajans. Those are very small subsets of the larger transformation that Swami expects. At least that's been my understanding, both from the scriptures and Swami's message.
Extremely profound, and I'm sure that Swami never sets low benchmarks. So when he said that you have to be like me, I'm sure he's setting the benchmark right up there.
Right.
So, but you know, I come back to this saying that faith is not easy, right? It takes a lot of effort, and you need to keep chugging along. You have to keep putting that effort, and even more so in testing times like we are going through right now. That is where it really shakes your faith, you know. And it tests you whether you have the resolve to stick to it. How can we do that? What is it that we can practice, or is there something that we can do regularly that strengthens this faith and fortifies it, that it never shakes even in the worst of situations?
So basically, I like to try an analogy. Does our faith in our mother shake in difficult times? Does it dwindle? No. Our parents is always there, good or bad. Long after they are gone, we'll see our parents or our grandparents also fondly remembering their parents. It's kind of eternal. Then why should we treat God at an inferior level? That faith in him starts shaking and dwindling the moment we face difficult situations. So the corollary to that is that the moment we have difficult situations, we should not have difficult situations at all. The God should always do good to us, or rather we should always experience good. Only then God is there. The moment we start experiencing difficulties, there is some problem either with God or our faith. then we are sadly mistaken, because the lives of all great devotees have always been ones of difficulties. The Mahabharata is full of the difficulties the Pandavas faced. In the 120 odd years of their lives, nearly 90 years were only in difficulties. That's the lesson we learn from the life of Prahalada. That's the lesson we learn from the life of Rama. That's the lesson we learn from lives of Tukarama, Tyagaraja, Mirabai, Annamacharya. Every great devotee, only major proportions are difficulties. But why are their lives exalted or held as ideals? Because in those difficult times, they stuck to God. And even if they didn't, they learned the lesson and came back. Like I gave the example of Bhadrachal Ramdas. Today, Bhadrachal Ramdas is venerated. In Golconda Fort, if you go, that jail where he was kept is still there. But for 14 years, he was there for what was his crime? That he constructed a temple for Rama on public demand from the money of the people. So for the people, he didn't pocket it. Today we have politicians who pocket the money of the people, and yet we are willing to forgive them. Here he did it for Rama, of people, for people, but for 14 years he was in jail. Why are these examples held before us as ideals? Because we need to know that the ones who are devotees will be tested, and that's where true faith is established. Dhiraja dharma mitra arunari, apat kala parakhiye chari. This is what Goswami Tulsidas has said. When is the true test of dhiraj, patience, dharma, adherence to righteousness, mitra, friendship, and nari, companionship? When will you know they are authentic or not? Apatakala parakhiye chari. It is only in difficult times that these four things reveal their true colors. So our faith also will reveal its true colors in difficult times. And why this fear? Just now, what are we fearing? We are fearing death. Why? Because the COVID is wreaking havoc. Actually, fear of death is very good, because fear of death is the first step in the spiritual journey. When Ramana Maharshi first had a death-like experience, if you read his biography, you will know, when he had the first death-like experience and he saw his body kind of dead, and he had risen above his body and he had a out-of-body experience. He was perspiring and all, and then he laid flat on the ground and he was almost like dead, and his soul saw his body lying down there for a few minutes. Then he went back. The next day he moved on and went straight to Arunachala in Tiruvannamalai and began his journey. Buddha, he saw the four sides of a sick man, of an aged man, of a dead man, and of a sadhu. And that one set of four sides transformed his journey, and he began on his spiritual quest for the remaining part of his life. Swami had said once in Trai, Buddha saw those four sides once. All of you have seen those four sides dozens of times. With one view of those four sides, Buddha's heart transformed permanently. That's why he became the Buddha. All of you all have seen it dozens of times, but not even an iota of change has come upon you. That's why all of you have no buddhi. We are without any sense of discrimination. So the fear of death is the beginning of the spiritual journey, because that is what will strengthen our focus towards improving ourselves. Next part, faith in Swami. For what? So that he will protect us. Okay, good. We should expect. If we won't expect from God, whom will we expect? Having received his protection, having been alive, having been healthy, what are we doing with this life is the question we need to ask ourselves. How are we leading this life better off than before? If all that we are going to do is, in Swami's words, khana, pina, sona, and then eventually one fine day marna, then how have we utilized God's grace for the purpose for which that grace has been given? If God's grace is demanded so that we live in the worldly ways and enjoy the senses and waste our precious time, then it's a waste of the grace. But if we say no, with that grace, we will work thrice or 5 times as hard to achieve our divine destination, then we become rightful candidates to receive that grace. So that faith and its strengthening will also come with a deep resolve that I'm going to use my time with all focus for that particular purpose. And for that, what we need to do is we need to live in the present. All the time we need to live in the present. All the time we do is either think of the past or about the future. Past is gone and future is unknown. But we never live in the present. And Swami always used to do that. Anyone you ask about Swami, who has spoken to Swami, has worked with Swami on a project, When Swami is speaking to you, only you exist for him in the world. He won't look here, he won't look there. He will give you 200% attention for those 30 seconds. Swami is doing a project for 6 months. He will give 200% attention to that project for 6 months. He will do anything to make it successful, make that project successful. We mortgaged the entire Vrindavan ashram for completing the water project. He said, I'm willing to mortgage myself, but this water project should be complete because it is for the benefit of lakhs and lakhs of individuals. There's no doubt that there is no parallel project to the kind Swami has done. In 12 years, Swami provided drinking water to 1% of India's population. 1.5 crore people in 3 states of India, Swami gave free drinking water without any help or support, only with appropriate collaborations. And no seeking of donations, no crowdfunding, no crowdsourcing, nothing. He mortgaged his property to raise the first round of money. And then when people saw the nobility of the endeavor, help came. That is the kind of focus in the present that Swami had. But we are not having that. And that is why we are having our problems. Our faith comes and goes this day, that day, and it keeps going like the pendulum. Once we know what it is, it should not go. Faith, Swami had said in Kodaikanal in 2003, one of the students said, Swami, I have some doubts. Please clarify them. Swami said, doubt undeటువంటి వాడు మానవుడు కాదు. The one who has doubts is not human being. Shraddhavan labate jnanam. The one who has faith only will get jnanam. Sanshayatma vinashati. The one who is in doubts will perish. So give up this doubt creating attitude and hold on to the faith attitude, which will help you to attain the ultimate. So if we keep saying that God has to keep on again and again and again validating his existence, Vibhuti should manifest, I should have some larger than life experiences, I should have some miracles in my life, Swami should reassert. You may seek for guidance and you have a right to demand it. But you cannot keep expecting that your faith should be revised by larger than life experiences here and now. And along with that, we have to resolve that we need to use the grace that we are getting for the ultimate purpose. Otherwise, it's a bad investment. To give money to a company who is doing business in a particular area and he uses that money for some other purpose. As an investor, Shiv Kumar, will you be happy with it?
No, not at all.
How will the divine investor be happy by investing grace in you and you are using it for grass and for gross stuff?
Correct.
This is my analysis and reflections based on what Swami said. So let us not put the ball always in God's court. Let us put all in our court and see where is it that I need to change and improve myself. Because Swami has proved himself and divinity is very, very manifest in every aspect of creation. So where is the doubt? Every day the sun is rising. Every day the sun is setting. The earth is still moving at the same speed. And by the way, for the COVID, I'd like to highlight to the viewers that we are having all these regular updates on COVID. So we are afraid and we are fighting a virus which we cannot see. But we are not having the faith in divinity which we have seen and who can protect us. We have faith in an unseen virus which is apparently taking our lives. But we do not have faith in the unseen power which is having the capacity to give us deliverance. That is the irony of the faithful. So that is important. And the kind of death, everybody dies. We are all going to die. Yeah? We are all going to die. The Yaksha Prashna, Yudhishthira and the Yaksha question answer, in that Yaksha asks Yudhishthira, what is the most surprising thing to you in the world? So Yudhishthira says the most surprising thing in this world is that everybody has to die one day. But everybody thinks that does not apply to him. Others will die, he will live forever. So that is the surprising part. It's not COVID. Every day in India, 1,500 people die to TB, malaria, cancer. In the last 15 years, 1 crore people have died just to 3 diseases in India. Have you been scared and fearful in the last 15 years? Every month, 50,000 people in America died to cardiac problems. Have we paid attention to Swami's message of avoid hurry, worry, curry to have a healthy heart? Then why all of a sudden so much fear on one particular thing? So we need to see things more holistically is what I'd like to say.
I'm sure that what you're also hinting at is that we should also take inspiration from Mother Kunti, who asked Krishna for more troubles, because then that reminded her of Krishna more and more and kept her in tune with him.
Yeah, but I wouldn't do follow her approach, because we have enough troubles in life. So even if we can float through them with
Manage that.
faith remaining strong, that is enough. I don't have the heart of Kunti to say that please give me troubles. Let me learn the lesson and remember him irrespective of the trouble. I think that will be a far greater commitment. Any form of God. It's not about Swami. Swami is the concretization of divinity in that particular form. All forms are his. And we are also Swami, as Swami said. The only difference is the formula: man plus desire equals to God. God minus desire equals to man minus desire equals to God. God plus desire equals to man. The diluted form of Swami. Swami is our perfected self. Once we get this equation right, then we'll be able to relate to him in
So taking a more positive take out of this, I mean, the fact is that the lockdown is here, and it's been there for 2.5 months now, and it may continue for a little longer time. Even if the lockdown goes away, maybe there'll be restrictions that we should all follow. In these circumstances, how can we continue to offer our seva as Sai devotees to the world outside? The kind of expectation that Swami may have. What are the things that you feel could be good ideas for us to pick up?
I think the organization is anyway doing a great job. The very fact that the Prime Minister of India reached out to top 10 socio-spiritual organizations, and we were one among them, and requested our help in helping the afflicted, the affected, those who are without resources, is a proof of the pudding that the Satsai Seva organizations and the Satyasai Central Trust institutions have established credibility in the public eye. And Swami's relentless efforts for 70, 80 years are bearing fruits that today, in Swami's physical absence also, our work speaks for ourselves. So that has not happened overnight. Silently, our master has worked for that and encouraged us to work. And with 6 lakh active workers, we are one of the largest committed social spiritual organizations in the world. One of the largest. So I think I'd look at it in 2 ways. From a very tangible way, for external service, we've distributed 14 lakh food packets with almost 30,000 Seva volunteers, and having 200 community kitchens across 10 states. So as and when called upon, whatever the circumstances demand, we should be able to do while following the law of the land. In the 10-point code of, in the 10 directive principles, Swami's always said the first thing is follow the law of the land, be a good citizen. So that we should do. But I would go one step further and repeat what I said earlier, that when you do not have an opportunity to serve outsiders in tangible ways, serve them through spiritual ways. One, of course, strengthen yourself spiritually through Swadhyaya and reading, reflecting, and internalizing. Second is Namasmarana is such a powerful thing. Swami said, you think that the army alone is protecting you, or the army alone protected the world, or all whatever over the last several millennia? No, it is the sadhana of the sadhakas and the sadhus and rishis and the great devout, irrespective of religions, in the different parts of the world and in the caves of Himalayas, that those vibrations are what are protecting humanity and surviving despite so many catastrophes. So we need to be focused on that bit, that if we cannot tangibly help outside, let us do sadhana, let us do namasmarana, let us pray for the well-being of the world, right? That is the seva we can do if we cannot do tangible things. Tangible things the organization is doing really well. And I think a lot of innovation and ideation can help us do even better.
Sure. I'm sure that there are a lot of things that even we as devotees, if we keep our eyes and ears open, through the various groups, we keep getting information about what the organization is contributing in its own way. And within the restrictions that are being kept by the government, we can keep contributing in our own ways. So yes, and one final question from my side before I take a few from the audience is, for all of us, Swami's Mahasamadhi was a turning point in our lives. It was perhaps the most difficult thing for us to come to terms with. because we fell in love with that physical form. We fell in love with all the interactions that he gave us, those little expressions of acknowledgement that he gave to every little thing that you did. Uh, how has how has it been post the Mahasamadhi for you personally? Have you had any experience where it has kind of reinforced your faith in his omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence?
Yeah, I already shared one thing connected with the Swadhyaya bit. As I said, I'm walking and listening, and I think that practice continues till date. If not every day or every alternate day, at least a couple of times a week, I invariably connect through Swami's discourses, and that's been one of the most powerful ways, and has given me far more conviction than what I experienced even in his physical form, which means the message outlasts the master, and the master comes only to give a message. That is true of all prophets, acharyas, and avatars. In terms of experiences, I'll share a tangible experience. This was during the sports meet drama of 2013, January 2013. It was always my desire to do a program, a drama, coordinate a drama on the life of Adi Shankaracharya, the great proponent of Advaita Vedanta. In fact, in one of the discourses, Swami said, it is only because of Adi Shankaracharya that India's culture has survived another millennia and a half. Otherwise, the kind of influences India was suffering at that point in time, the entire India would kind of have developed a communist mindset of atheism and disbelief in God. So he's a phenomenal personality, lived only 32 years, and even today, the 4 mutts he established in 4 corners of India continue to survive. There is no parallel in the corporate institutional setup which has survived how many centuries? About 13 centuries. The Tata Group is hailed, and I mentioned about my book, 150 years. With all the modern practices, globalization, etc., they are India's largest conglomerate. Here you're talking about an institution which is set up by Adi Shankaracharya in 8th century AD in 4 corners of India, have survived 13 centuries, over a millennium. So, very inspiring personality. Swami has given dozens of discourses on Adi Shankaracharya's life. In fact, he directed a play called Bhaj Govindam, which is based on the Bhaj Govindam of Adi Shankaracharya, and took the kids to and brought the students to Shanmukhananda Hall in 1974 to present it in Mumbai in front of thousands of devotees. He also took them to Chaudhaya Memorial Hall in Bangalore in 1987-88 with another batch, the same Bhaj Govindam. So in 2013, which was the silver jubilee of that drama, we put it up. It wasn't directly the Bhaj Govindam. It was based on Adi Shankaracharya's life and message from Swami's discourse. Very fulfilling. But while I was coordinating that drama, I kept on reminding myself, asking myself that I am also at an age or reaching an age where Adi Shankaracharya concluded his life. This soul achieved so much in 32 years. Christ achieved so much in 32 years. What can those of us who have entered our 30s learn from them, and how can we become like them if these are the role models Swami has placed before us? This was a thought to me in my heart. I didn't ask anybody. This is just going on, reflecting on that. The drama was over, very well received, lot of accolades. Prize distribution was over. We got back into the normal thing. And then one fine day, I get a dream from Swami. Swami and I are sitting in the interview room. Again, this is for me. And I don't make any, I always believe dreams are for personal guidance. Swami was sitting with me in the interview room, or rather I was sitting with Swami in the interview room. I was with Swami in the interview room. And Swami said, "You're a researcher, isn't it?" I said, "Yes, Swami." What does a researcher do? The way the conversation happened, I'm sure that this is directly coming from Swami in some form. I said, so then Swami himself gave the answer. He said, a researcher prepares a table of contents first. What is the research question? How we will go about achieving it? Then the findings, then the learnings, etc. He prepares a table of contents. And then based on the table of contents, he exactly accomplishes the research project, isn't it? I said, yes, Swami. Swami said, in the same way, you should prepare a table of contents for your life and identify what are all the things that you want to do in your lifetime. And then work towards each of them with total focus and commitment. I'm not interested in quantity. I want total quality commitment from your end. Don't compare yourself with Adi Shankaracharya or Jesus Christ. You identify what you want to do and give your 100% to that. That is all that I expect. I think this was a very insightful experience. And ever since, I keep reminding myself that whatever we do, we should do it with total quality, not worrying about the quantity. Though a larger quantity is beneficial from a macro perspective, but quality is a priority. And we need to take inspiration from these great souls. We need to define what we want to do and work towards it. I think that's what Swami expects from each one.
That's very beautifully put, and only Swami could have made it so simple to understand.
Yeah, and giving a professional example because of my research connection. So I think this definitely, I couldn't create this. Even my subconscious mind couldn't have created this. So this is definitely the kind of experience and omniscience or whatever, because this was a genuine spiritual doubt which I was having for over 2 months.
Beautiful. So there's a very interesting question that has come from another devotees.
Okay.
As I see, there are some questions that have started pouring in, and
Yes,
one
yes.
of them is quite interesting. Swami says, all are alike, be alike to everyone. And he also says, avoid bad company. How can we, play with these seemingly contradictory advices?
Correct.
How do we,
It's
how do
not
we juggle these
contradictory.
two?
It is
Yeah.
not contradictory. Simple.
Seemingly, yeah.
Two-point answer. One, all are alike in essence, which means the divinity in everybody is the same, not in external appearances. Externally, our vasanas and samskaras are different. Now, there is, as Ramakrishna Paramahamsa always used to say, there is divinity even in the tiger. So revere it, but don't go and embrace it like you would to a fellow human being, because the tiger doesn't know that you are divine, and then you will know what will happen. So you keep a distance from the tiger, because the tiger has the tendencies which will in your existence. Similarly, there are a lot who come with the vasanas and the vrittis which are harmful to your own spiritual progress. So you keep a distance from them, but always remember that behind the vrittis is the self or the atma or the divinity that is shining forth. And so never hate the person. Hate or distance yourself from his negative vrittis or his vasanas, so that you do not become influenced by them, because the mind is extremely impressionable. The moment it lands itself in such environment, it will surrender. Just like for Vishwamitra, the one whose penance was leading to heat in the Amaravati, and Indra's asana started shaking, that this man's sadhana will eventually make him eligible for the role of Indra. So he sent the Menaka downstairs to distract. What is an apsara? Basically, it is the tantalizing world. There's so much of symbolism in our scriptures. So very, very nice symbolism. What is Indra? Indra is actually our Indriyas, the very master of the Indriyas, the senses. So the senses start feeling insecure that this individual will master over us. So we will become slaves to him and he will have no value for us. So what does Indra or the senses do? They start distracting the mind and send tantalizing attraction. So it is said in the scriptures, Indra will send Apsara or Menak. And what does a sadhaka like Vishwamitra do? He succumbs and falls. That's why we have to always be careful. And that's why Swami said avoid bad company. But I repeat, love the person, distance yourself from his negative traits.
Beautiful, beautiful. I think that's very lucidly explained. There's another question that someone's asked about if Swami has elaborated on Kundalini sadhana for students and during any of the Kodai trips, and if this could you could
No,
throw some
not to
light
the
on that.
best of my knowledge, but there is a discourse on the Satyasai with Students blog. So I'll encourage a lot of the viewers to visit that blog. It's put together based on the experiences of students, discourses to students, conversations with students. So there is a two-part discourse on meditation and how we can achieve success with that. So you'll find answer there. But in my own trips, I don't remember Swami having spoken about Kundalini. Swami was extremely practice oriented. And I think most of the discourses he gave to the students per se was more on the practice side rather than advanced sadhana. I think you need to be ready in your basic sadhana to be receiving methods or processes connected with the Kundalini. Dhyan is another reference material. I'd encourage the viewers to read it.
Okay, Okay. So I'll take one final question over here. Simple living, high thinking. This is a saying that we've been trying to follow. Can you please elaborate from Swami's life or any related episodes?
So in the hostel we always used to joke. He's simply living and highly thinking. So, and for those who with the South Indian accent, we used to joke. He's simply living and highly thinking. So that's the problem with us. We are simply living. We are living for the sake of the same khana, pina, sona, marna. And we are highly thinking based on our accomplishments that I have achieved a successful career. I have made so much of money for myself. My children are studying in Ivy League institutions. I have a villa in a particular location. This mindset, when it goes in the other direction, where we realize that none of these are our true assets to have developed in this world. Simplicity of thinking means that irrespective of whatever we develop, we have a very clear and simple thinking, a simple life wherein ultimately everybody is going to simple living. Ultimately, everybody is going to eat the same chapati and needs the same 4x6 place to sleep, and then ultimately get buried or burnt above the ground. The requirements are the same for all. So that simple living should reflect on the ultimate realities of life. But high thinking means irrespective of the resources we have or not, how can we do for others? Having been born in a small village of Puttaparthi with no resources at his disposal and with 3 desires of his mother for the sake of the women folk of his place on water, healthcare and education, how did Swami bring about 3 superlative projects that not only benefited Puttaparthi but benefited Anantapur, benefited the entire state, or rather 3 states? That is the example of simple living, high thinking. In 43 years of his life, from 25 to 68, 1950 to 1993, we're talking about simple living and high thinking. Swami lived in a room which is 8 by 10 in size, and his bathroom was 4 by 6. Now, from 25 to 68 is the age when we move from 1 BHK to 2 BHK to 3 BHK to a villa and all of that, right? Those are our aspirations. Swami lived in that 8 by 10 and 4 by 6 bathroom. For the first 3 decades, that bathroom was Indian toilet. I'm getting into specifics. Swami had a wooden bench and a wooden chair and table and a wooden cupboard for keeping his belongings and sitting and writing the Vahinis. He had a small old-time yellow bulb in the bathroom, which used to switch on and write his Vahinis many times, because if we keep the room light on, the Mandir people will know Swami is awake. So at night, if he has some inspiration to write, he used to do that. And I still remember Ramakrishna Reddy sir, who's accounts teacher, he mentioned once during Swami's 50th birthday, Swami had called some of the students upstairs to clean the veranda and all. These are opportunities to interact with Swami. So he called there, and then after that, he selected some boys to clean the room. So Ramakrishna Reddy sir has been with Swami from the 1960s. He came as a 2 or 3 year old kid and then stayed with Swami. He was there even now. He's 67. So he went and into Swami's bathroom. He wanted to clean Swami's bathroom. And he opened the bathroom. And when he opened the bathroom, he saw that the bathroom had plain cement flooring. It did not even have tiles. Swami's bathroom did not have tiles when Swami was 50 years of age. That is the kind of simple living at the personal level Swami always lived by. But what kind of high thinking he practiced, I've already shared. When Swami was working on, in the same bathroom, when some of the students used to assist him with the water and all of that, when normal water started flowing, earlier buckets used to be taken up. Swami used to say, you have not put a tumbler in the bathroom. He said, Swami, there is a normal flowing of water in the basin. Why do you need a tumbler? Swami said, no, I want to measure how much water I am using. Just because there is flowing water, how much of water gets wasted. So I want to measure and only use accordingly. Not like you boys, when you shave and brush and all, have bath and all, the water is all getting wasted. Whose grandfather's property it is, you think? So that is simple living and high thinking. If we study Swami's life, we will know what is simple living and high thinking. Whenever Swami took a letter from the student, if the letter is written only on the top half, and Siddharth and Jaishankar, or you all would have seen, Swami used to fold that letter, tear the lower half where nothing was written, give it back to the student, and take only the half where the letter was written and say, don't waste paper. There's a very famous Aarti video where after lighting the lamp, Swami is saying something to the students. There are so many Aarti videos. Swami is just doing like this and then he's showing a finger like this. So most people don't know what Swami is saying. I shared this in Raleigh when I gave a talk 2 years back. Swami was saying, with one matchstick, I lit 4 Aartis. One matchstick, 4 Aartis. Don't waste, Swami said. This is simple living and high thinking. The smallest of things that we do, if we can keep in mind these fundamental principles and how Swami lived them, everything else will become Sahaja Sabhava. There will not be any need to do anything special for this.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, brothers, so much. I think it has been an extremely enriching session. I've personally enjoyed this conversation. I think some of the key points that you have, emphasized on and re-emphasized on is that our faith in Swami should be unshakable. Our conscience is really the voice of Swami, and we have to develop that personal inner connect with Bhagwan. And the way to do that is obviously to try and take efforts and read more and more of Swami's literature, listen to Swami's discourses, and try and imbibe them and follow them. Nothing else can serve us better. Thank you so much, Brother Shashank. This has been an engaging and enriching conversation.
Thank you.
I now, Sai Ram, and I hand this over to Brother Jaishankar to take it forward. Sai Ram.
Sai Ram, brothers. Thank you, Shashank, for this wonderful session. I would like to take this opportunity to maybe share some of the activities being done at Dharmakshetra. These are indeed tough times. Every one of us is itching to go out there and do seva. I think we have been waiting for this moment, but then our hands are tied literally due to this lockdown. All of us are constrained to stay at home, but with the blessings of Bhagwan, seva activities have commenced at Dharmakshetra in a very measured way, strictly as per the government protocols, guidelines issued by the municipal authorities, etc. And we would like to share some of the activities being done at Dharmakshetra. Like Brother Shashank said, these activities are going all around India. And the fact that the Prime Minister of India had a conversation with our organization is indeed it's a recognition of the activities being done. We would just like to share some of the service as seva activities, or rather the community kitchen which is being run at Dharmakshetra. And Dharmakshetra has been doing these activities, and food packets and other food kits are reaching out to all the red zones, as we say right now in Mumbai. And Bhagwan's unseen hand is indeed there on all of us. And these activities have been going on beautifully for the last 1 month or so. We would like to share a small video clip that has been prepared in this regard.
Na punyam na papam na saukyam na dukkham na mantra na tirtham na vedana yajnam aham bhojanam na bhojanam naiva bhojam na katam Sadanandarupam Advaitam Sadanandarupam Advaitam सत्यं शिवम्